Valentine's Day. I think I know most of you, but if I don't, I'm Luciana Spraker with the City of Savannah Municipal Archives, and I want to welcome you to our first Hungry for History talk in February. And before I get started with today's program, I'll mention we have 2 Hungry for Histories in February, which is exciting. So our next talk is going to be right here at 12 noon on Friday, February 28th, and we're going to have Dr. Elena Pirok with Georgia Southern University, who's going to be presenting the oldest living landmark, Preserving the Past in Trees. And in it, she's going to take a historical look at the creation of the Candler Oak easement and place it inside the city's larger historical preservation movement and the environmental movement of the 1970s and 1980s. And she's going to use archival records from the Savannah Tree Foundation. So she's going to be seeking to answer the question, why protect this tree? So if you're interested in attending that talk, you can see me after the end of this talk and sign up for that. But let's turn our attention to today's program, Savannah Roots, a story of African American cultural resilience and innovation. And we're really happy to have with us Meredith Stone. Meredith is a Savannah native with a background in architectural and urban design, historic preservation, and real estate. She has a Master of Architecture degree from Hampton University, and she's established her career here in Savannah with GM Shea, designing and managing housing, hospitality, institutional, and commercial developments. One of her most notable projects is the Savannah Cultural Arts Center, which she did for us here at the City of Savannah. She's also the director at Vantage Commercial Group of Seabolt Real Estate. She serves as vice chair of the Chatham County Zoning Board of Appeals, is a board member of Creative Coast, and she volunteers her time with local organizations like Historic Savannah Foundation and Housing Savannah. Meredith has been a TEDx speaker. She's an advocate for community building, small business advancement, and educating youth. And I'm also happy to say that she just agreed to serve on our new Friends of City Hall group as a new board member. We're really in the early stages of developing that group, but you'll be hearing more information from me as that group gets formed and we start pushing it out. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Meredith and welcome her to our group. Just watch the part.
And it's really great to see everyone today. I see some familiar faces, but a lot of new faces, so I'm really excited to share this story.
Can't hardly hear you back here.
You can't hear? Okay, all right. I'll try to enunciate. Can you guys hear me a little bit better?
Yes.
All right, awesome. So this is a really, really special story about Savannah. Like Luciana mentioned, I was born and raised in Savannah on this property where this home sits today. It's located just south of Savannah State University on what was the Placentia Plantation, which later got split up and subdivided into what is now Savannah State University, as well as privately owned lots as well. I want to first say thank you to all of you that are here today. It is because of you that the history that makes Savannah what it is stays alive. So regardless of your faith or your background or your denomination or anything, I would like to ask everyone to take a moment of pause and silence to acknowledge our ancestors that placed us here today. All right, thanks. So let's get started. This is my family, the Stones and the Peelers. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one of these people and what they did to impact history in Savannah, the state of Georgia, and our nation. This is Percy Hunter Stone. He's my grandfather. He purchased the home that is just south of Savannah State in 1933, the same year that he founded 4-H for black people in the state of Georgia. At the time, there were only 4-H programs for white people in the state of Georgia. He was hired as an extension agent in Clark County, Georgia, moved to Savannah, and embarked on a mission to found the first center for 4-H in the state of Georgia, and actually in the nation, that was built for Black people. Also, I'd like to acknowledge Rebecca Fenwick with Ethos is in the building, and thanks to her phenomenal work, the only one building that is left at that site at the Dublin Center now is now nominated, or it's not nominated, it has been listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This is my great aunt and uncle, Monroe Nathan and Florence Hendrickson Work. Monroe Nathan Work was one of America's first sociologists. He had the great pleasure of working with W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington simultaneously to provide all of the data for them to use to acknowledge what was happening to Black people during the Jim Crow times, during segregation, and to help people track a lot of different pieces of information, education progress from the South to the North, and also lynchings. Silas Peeler and Constance Hendrickson Work are the great-grandparents of my grandmother, Harriet. You can kind of tell the resemblance a little bit. We look a whole lot alike. Silas was president at Bennett College in North Carolina. He met Constance Hendrickson Peeler while she was attending Clark University, which is now Clark Atlanta University. She was one of the first 7 women to graduate from Clark University. Silas was a Methodist minister that gained his roots in Macon, Georgia. He went on to serve as a Methodist minister in many places, landed at Bennett College, and raised his family throughout the South. Harriet Peeler Stone is a dynamic woman and has a very interesting and unique background herself. Harriet's descendants, Constance Hendrickson Peeler and Florence Hendrickson Work, were descendants of the Placentia Plantation. Their mother, who you will see later in this slide, Gannett, was born a slave, and she was part of a fleet of slaves that were part of John McQueen's ownership. Okay? And then Alma Stone Williams. Alma Stone Williams is my aunt. She was the first Black person to integrate a Southern white college in the U.S. 20 years before it was ever mandated by the federal government that we all had to work and educate together. She was a very marvelous woman, very brilliant woman, and she helped to initiate a lot of music organizations and education throughout Savannah, as well as the other institutions that she touched. So let's get started talking about all of these different people. This is Percy and Harriet. This is Florence Work and Monroe Nathan Work. And this is the woman, Gannett, that I was describing earlier, who is the grandmother of Harriet Stone. Gannett was the person that was born a slave. You can see Gannett holding Harriet. This was a picture taken in 1910. This is Gannett. She was a matriarch. She was a seamstress. She worked on uniforms of military members in the South. She did a lot of phenomenal things, but she was an advocate for her children being educated. And both of her daughters in the early 1900s were fully college educated with master's degrees. And this is Florence sitting on the porch. This is the home that everybody lived in and where my family was raised. And as you can see, this is my dad actually, which is really funny in a diaper up front here. But this is taken in front of the garage apartment that still sits on the property today and is actively leased. So how do you, when you think of Savannah, I think of Savannah as a transient city. There are a lot of people that come and go through Savannah, and there's a lot of action happening, especially in economic ways, but how many of you think of Savannah as a place of social and racial revolution? Do you? Yeah. Well, truly, this family is, and many other African American stories in Savannah, is a testament to how much change Savannah has really influenced and how big Savannah has been on the map to influence change in other places. This is a map of all the places where the members of my family that I just showed touched during their careers and their lives, and the places that they journeyed to take their work that they started in Savannah and spread it elsewhere. So let's take a look at Percy Hunter Stone first. This is my grandfather. He was an amazing man. He had 6 children, 3 from his first marriage, which unfortunately ended because of a very tragic death that happened early when his wife was actually pregnant with their 4th child. He married Harriet after that. Harriet was 17 years younger than him, so his oldest daughter, Alma, was only 10 years older than Harriet. She always called her mom, though. We had a very tight family and a very supportive family culture and understanding. And this is, I call him Pop because, it's my granddad, but this is Pop in front of our garage apartment. And up until the end of his life, when he passed away in 1987, he took care of the home, he took care of the land, and he worked with fellow Savannah State students and faculty to keep this place as a place that could be a center for community enhancement, development, and family gathering. Here's Percy Hunter's timeline. He was born in 1893 in Rocky Mount, Virginia, to free parents on a cold-frame tobacco farm. The reason why this detail is important is because back then, crops, and still today, are cash. And when you were up north, it was very difficult during the cold winter months to figure out how to still maintain the crops in order to cash out at the end of the season. So he was trained in a very special, innovative way of tobacco farming. And it's because of him being raised on that farm that actually led him to attend Hampton Institute, my alma mater, Hampton University, and become a part of the extension agency and move on to educate others in agriculture throughout the nation. He served in both World Wars. He graduated from Hampton Institute. He went on to Athens, like I mentioned, to become the 2nd African American county agent. He was then promoted to be the 4-H club leader. He became state supervisor of the African American Extension in 1926. He purchased a small farm, which is the land where the home sits today, and installed, actually had chickens, cows, corn, all types of stuff on the farm that was on the land. At the same time that he bought the small farm, per the urging of one of Savannah State University's presidents, he then established the Negro 4-H Boys and Girls Club and the 4-H state newspapers. This was very special. His office was only 800 feet away from the home, so there was a very tight community between the home and the 4-H program. Even when he retired, he did not retire. He trained up his successor, and his successor lived in the home while he went on to become a national agent for state extension. He became the assistant administrator to federal extension in Washington, D.C. after he retired. He returned to Georgia to open the center in Dublin. It took a little while for the center to take root because of the war and trying to collect all the assets in order to build the center. In 1959, he closed his 40-year career in agricultural extension. He taught at Prairie View. In 1973, his portrait was hung at Rock Eagle, and it still stands there today. And then in 2022, he was inducted into the National 4-H Hall of Fame in Washington, D.C. Like I mentioned, he was a very decorated man. He was in a lot of of publications and articles for the work that he was doing, but he was not a very loquacious man, I would say. He was very quiet, but when he spoke, everyone listened, because you knew he had something important to say. He made a lot of partnerships that were very unconventional for this era of our history. So this man right here is Mills B. Lane Jr. And Percy partnered with Mills B. Lane Jr. in order to fund the plans that he made for the 4-H club at Dublin. So it is because of him, these are examples of some of the contributions that came from different people in order to make the center. And this is where Dublin is, for anyone that is unaware, in the center of Georgia. It's because of the work that he did that all of this was able to happen. And here are some images. His office is actually still intact in the home, so all of these documents are sitting in his desk just as he left them. This is him doing an extension display with a lot of the youth and the kids that were part of it. He was very active, as you can see, and hands-on. Even though he was a director, he was also in the field as a teacher. This is Albert Bacon. This is the man that was his predecessor, and this is Pop after he retired, basically training and teaching Albert Bacon everything about extension agency so it could be left in good hands. Like I mentioned, he never retired really, so all of the people that he mentored always came back to the property and hung out and spent time with Percy until 1987 when he passed away. And this is some of his predecessors and colleagues that were in the extension agency coming over to our property to talk. Pop also started the 4-H state letters. He was an amazing gardener. He had a great affinity for roses, so this was his rose bush field that was on the property that he tended to until he passed away. And this is an image of his portrait being hung at Rock Eagle. This is an example of one of the solicitations that he put out to people. It says, "Will you please help us build a cottage?" And he had provocative messages like this that would document the upstanding youth that the 4-H was leading, but they didn't have a place to go. And so, again, all of the people that he worked with, they were always welcome at home. He kept up with students, faculty. This is Savannah State University in the background. This was the Bowen Smith dorm that was just recently demolished. And this was Pop in the yard, just doing yard work every day. All right, next is the Peeler family. Also very, very unique people. The people up on the left are George Wood Hendrickson and Harriet Frances Bird Hendrickson. Harriet is the woman known as Ganad, okay? Harriet, the original Harriet, went on to raise her family. This is Harriet as she got a little bit older. This is her daughter Constance. This is Harriet, my grandmother, in her lap. And again, Harriet, my grandmother, in her lap, and her siblings in Savannah in 1910. Silas is very interesting, along with the rest of the Peeler family, because they worked very closely with a lot of established black leaders throughout the South in order to promote betterment of higher education and advancement for black people. This is Silas, and that's Booker T. Washington. So this was a conference that was held in North Carolina in order to basically get together and figure out how to advance greater and higher education in North Carolina. Our family roots ran deep in Savannah. This is the Hardwick family who are kin to the Hendricksons. The Hardwick family, if you guys are familiar with Clifford Hardwick, okay, that's my cousin. So, and this is our family, again, Silas and Constance and our entire family. Constance was a very religious woman, and she was very active and involved in the Methodist ministry. This is an image of her in North Carolina at one of the Methodist conferences. Monroe and Florence Work are our next set of interesting family members. This is an image of Florence and Monroe rowing Monroe's boat in our backyard. So again, because Gamma was very familiar with this land, her family was enslaved on this land, they were master maneuvers of water. They knew how to fish, they knew how to shrimp, they knew how to crab, they loved to throw down. They loved their life on the sea. And when Monroe moved to Savannah in 1904, in order to teach at Savannah State University, he married Flo. And they spent, up until the time that Monroe left and got detailed to go to Tuskegee with Booker T. Washington, they did their studies and they did their work at Savannah State and lived very close by. So again, Monroe Nathan Work and Florence Work were very integral for our nation's history for a couple different reasons. And a big one is lynching. Lynching is a terroristic activity that especially white people, and more than white people, it still happens today, would do to black people in order to erase our culture, erase our history, and to just promote hate. And it was really challenging, especially during the Great Migration when people were leaving in waves from the South and going to the North to reestablish their lives. You didn't really know where your namesake came from by design. You didn't really know where you were going, and it was really easy for you to go missing. But because of the political landscape at the time, it was very politicizing to talk about lynchings. The North wanted to demonize the South for the tragedies that were happening to black people, so they were known to inflate the data and statistics about what was actually happening in the South. So Monroe got to work. This is a snapshot in history of all the things that were taking place, at least just from the Civil War up until Jim Crow began, that were designed to oppress black people's progress in the nation after they were freed from slavery. Unfortunately, while Monroe was in the thick of doing a lot of great work in Savannah, Georgia, in 1906, when Jim Crow began, overnight his rights as a man were stripped from him immediately. And that made it very difficult for him to really gain the footing in the movements that he had started in order to encourage his black brothers and sisters to all get together and trust white people and work together so that we could all live in Savannah happily and thrive together. There's extreme outpour of violence, and Monroe quickly realized that his idealist goals of having everyone be able to work and live together in synergy were quickly rolling backwards in the midst of his work. Around that time, the Niagara movement began, which was the predecessor of the NAACP. The Niagara movement was started by W.B. Du Bois, and the Niagara movement was meant as to be a collection of, to be a place where black leaders that were from all over the country could get together and talk about, in political ways, what was happening and demand reform and change. What W.B. Du Bois realized is that their leaders were coming to all of these lectures and protests, and they were getting out and they were saying all of these things, and they didn't know their facts. And that doesn't look good. So W.B. Du Bois worked really hard, said, okay, I know your guy, and he lives in Savannah, Georgia. His name is Monroe Nathan Work, and that's who you all need to talk to. So it was at that point that he got enlisted into the Niagara movement. He worked with that for a while, and because of his work, basically providing the data and the real statistics on what was happening throughout the U.S., Booker T. Washington called on him and said, hey, I'm actually about to embark on something major at Tuskegee University. I would like for you to found the Department of Research and Records at Tuskegee Institute. And it is at Tuskegee Institute where the Negro Yearbook was born, which was the trusted publication to mark and track all progress of Black people during this era up until around the time that desegregation happened. So a little bit more background and timeline. Again, he was from Kansas. He also grew up on a farm. He went to theology school but realized he didn't have the cadence or the voice to really be heard as a preacher. So he said, you know what, I'm going to stick to the books. And he went ahead and got his master's degree from the University of Chicago. The reason why he did that is because the University of Chicago had a place where they would let him publish the research that he was doing. And they were a trusted source to provide other newspapers with actual facts that were coming from a non-biased source. He moved to Savannah. He became a professor of history and pedagogy at Savannah State. He then went to become the director of Department of Records and Research at Tuskegee. He created the Negro Yearbook. He was very integral in starting the Negro Health Week. He and Booker T worked tirelessly because they were both passionate about improving the state of Black health throughout the nation. And they were the two biggest advocates of Negro Health Week until it was officially adopted by the U.S. government. He was submitted, his portrait was submitted to the Smithsonian for portraits of outstanding Americans of Negro origin, and he passed away in 1945. What's very special about Monroe is that his work and his life's work was able to be achieved because of his partner, Flo. Florence was very unique because she had her own career at a time that women didn't really have their own careers. But she was a school teacher, and what she would do after she finished educating her students, she would come home and read through all of the periodicals and books that she could find, and she would bookmark the things that Monroe needed to pay attention to in order for him to also be able to do his work. And they were known for being seen through the window at night with their lamp on, just reading books every evening. They were constantly just generating as much data as they could to provide facts about the South. Again, this is Flo and Constance in the upper hand corner. This is actually taken out of Harriet's memoirs. She had a couple of different scrapbooks that we uncovered in the home. She carried a camera around with her while she was in Tuskegee, and she took pictures of the life of all of these people that she was passing by on a day-to-day and that Monroe and Florence were working with. This is an example of some of the data that Monroe provided for publications. This is an example of the days of schooling per year of each Negro child of school age. And you can see that this would actually show people where states ranked in actually doing the work that they said that they were going to do to educate young Black people. Again, Harriet was very special to Monroe and Florence because they did not have any children, but Harriet was basically their adopted daughter. And Harriet worked on multiple publications of the Negro Yearbook. And it is because of her work, Florence's work, and Monroe's work that was able to be published. When they passed away, all of the personal archives that Monroe and Florence collected, their entire personal library was inherited by my grandmother. And that has lived in the home by Savannah State since. And so these are examples of some of the documents that we found. Some were original, some were signed by Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois. I mean, it's really a deep treasure of information and rich information on the progress of blacks. This is a quote from the woman that wrote the biography of Monroe Nathan Work, and this again speaks to his character. Monroe was a very powerful, if somewhat silent force in the campaign to eradicate lynching, and a number of other organizations sought his advice and support. Behind the scenes, in his usual quiet manner, he supplied the data that was used to demonstrate the destructive and repressive power of lynching. These are images of Monroe and Florence. This was them together. They were not often photographed together because he was always working. But these are some images that were taken out of our archive. This is Constance and Florence at their old age. They stayed very connected, and they were always in Savannah, spending time with our extended Savannah family. And now comes Harriet, my grandmother. Matriarch, home economics guru. She had mean backhand and could do it in kitten heels. She was just a phenomenal woman. And she made her marks on history in her own way as well. Harriet was born in 1910 and passed away in 2008. She lived most of her life in the home next to Savannah State. She was detailed, notice the date, when she was 10 years old to start archiving on the Negro Yearbook. So she established her roots very early in figuring out how to professionally document Black progress and other progress. She was a historian. She was also the historian of Asbury Methodist Church. She graduated from Tuskegee High School. Then she went on to Hampton Institute, where she worked and traveled under the composer Dr. Nathaniel Dett. And I'll tell you guys a little bit more about this story. It's a really unique one. After she graduated from Hampton, she was hired as a home economics professor at Savannah State. She went on to develop a home economics demonstration school in Hancock County, which fed its students to Savannah State's home economic program. While she was doing that, her work was interrupted because Monroe needed help again in archiving and publishing more data. So he called her to come with him to University of Chicago, and that's where she began her master's degree in textiles. She moved back to Savannah after she finished her work with Monroe, went back to Savannah State as a home economics professor. Conveniently, her office was 400 feet away from the home as well. And when Percy learned of Harriet's connection to the land and her family's connection to the land, and with the recent passing of his ex-wife, he said, you know what, I think I can give this lady a shot. And they got married and had 3 more children. And for the record, Percy put all 6 of his children through higher education and put all of their children through higher education as well. So he was truly a remarkable man. He believed in educating his family, and he believed in building the legacy that was responsible for tomorrow. Harriet married Percy. She completed her master's degree when they moved to Washington, D.C., when Percy became part of the Federal Extension Agency. And while she was getting her master's degree, she ran into her mentor, Fleming Kittrell. And Fleming Kittrell is a very special woman in history. She is responsible in a lot of ways for creating the Head Start program in the U.S. Harriet and Fleming were very tight, and Harriet was a little bit concerned because her thesis that she started in Chicago was in textiles. But Fleming Kittrell convinced her to change her major to early childhood education, to change her master's focus to early childhood education. She could still finish her studies for what she was doing in textiles, but she earned her master's degree at Howard University and graduated as the valedictorian in her master's program in early childhood education. She then went on to become a charter member of Jack and Jill of America, Inc. Savannah chapter. It was very special for her to be a part of this because at the time there were not very many families, black families, that had access to a lot of land. But this was a place where, at least within Savannah, this was a place where everybody could come together, they could have family days, they could have all types of activities. And when we were pursuing all of the documentation of this, in order to see if the home could qualify to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places, we interviewed countless Jack and Jill members that all said that they loved coming to the home. They could go crabbing, they could pick fruit off the trees. It was just home. And HP is what we called her. She didn't like to be called grandma, she only liked to be called HP. But HP was known for always having food on the table. And Savannah State students, as well as people in the community, could always come by, and they knew that if she had an ingredient in her kitchen, she was going to make it taste really good for whoever arrived. In 1967, she became the director of Savannah Chatham County's Head Start program. And this is really special because Head Start was founded in 1965 while HP was getting her thesis under the leadership of Flemmy Kittrell. And this is Harriet in the first Project Head Start class in 1965. So she took the work that she started with Flemmy Kittrell in DC, and when they finished their work in DC, she moved back to Savannah so she could help establish and expand Head Start in Savannah. This is the Black America Series Savannah, Georgia book written by Dr. Charles Elmore. Dr. Charles Elmore and my grandmother were great friends, and this is a note that he wrote in her copy of the book: "To Harriet Peeler Stone, whom I love so dearly, without your help, this book would have never been written." She was a very profound woman. She knew her facts, and she was able to provide a lot of information, even to Charles, as he was writing his history book on Savannah. These are some letters and things that she wrote while people were doing more research and writing books on our family. And this is her acknowledging that her work with her uncle in 1931 and 1932. This is Jessie Guzman. She helped to pick up the work after Monroe Nathan Work passed away. She continued to write the Negro Yearbook and publish the yearbook. And Harriet was also very active into her old age. She drove a Volvo around town until she was 96 years old, and she would go and meet up with her friends in towns in and around Georgia and make sure that they were still okay. And these are the people that were working on the same monumental work with her. And she just wanted to make sure that everyone was okay and taken care of. This is Harriet and the choir of Hampton traveling to Europe in 1930 under the tour of Robert Nathaniel Dett. And this is a very special and important moment because at this time, it's funny how history repeats itself, but there was a battle of the superior race that was occurring. And black people were at the bottom of it. And there were people that were saying that black people were not talented, that they were not educated, that they were incapable of basically showing up to society and being equal to other people. And Robert Nathaniel Dett was a world-class composer, and he took the choir of Hampton University on a tour of Europe. They went to Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland. 3,000 people heard them sing at Westminster Abbey, and in Berlin they received more than a dozen calls for encore. They were that good. But this was the type of work that they were doing, to keep showing, to keep proving that no matter what, we still rise. Alma Stone also had a profound background in music. She was born in 1921, and again, Notice this date, 1936, she attended Spelman. So she was 14 years old when she was admitted to Spelman College. She graduated as valedictorian with 2 majors in English and music at Spelman. She went on from there to get her master's degree from Atlanta University. She taught at the Penn Center. She taught music at Fort Valley State. She was the first person, like I mentioned, to integrate a Southern white college, Black Mountain College in North Carolina. She has a portion of Black Mountain College's museum dedicated to her work. She wrote a short memoir and stayed very active in Black Mountain's Alumni Association until she passed away. She won the Rosenwald Foundation Fellowship and was accepted into Juilliard to become, she was an amazing pianist in order to become a pianist. After that, or while she was doing that, she met a man, and he was also a professor, and she said, you know what, I want to raise my family. So she had 5 children, and they lived in South Carolina State. Her husband, again, passed away, unfortunately, from a tragic accident. So she brought her family back home. And my grandfather helped raise Alma's family, his extended family. And she lived in and around Savannah State until she passed away. She co-founded Sonata, which is a group for music education here in Savannah. And then she was featured in 2007 in a documentary for Black Mountain College. These are some images of just life at home. This is Alma and her husband. This is my father and Percy and Harriet's children and their children. They were all growing up the same age. This is, again, them in the yard. This is family and friends picking fruit off the trees in the yard. This is my Aunt Marilyn, who also was raised at the home and continued to be a professor at Savannah State in biology and other subjects. This, again, like I mentioned, Constance Peeler was a very religious woman. And at one point, Savannah State University had a very open campus. And it was not uncommon for the people that were in the neighborhoods and the communities around them to just come to Savannah State's campus and live their lives and have a place where they were welcome and they were safe. Here is an image of Constance praying at Unity Circle on Savannah State's campus. The house was just a few hundred feet away, so this was something that she did up until the time that she passed away. It was part of her regular routine. This is my father. Percy Stone built a causeway because he was an avid fisherman. And this is an image of my father throwing the cast net off of the dock. And this dock is located next to Savannah State's old dock, which was, their first boat was christened on our dock at Savannah State. This is Harriet, her brother, and her sister. Harriet's brother was one of the first, or he was part of the first troop of Black Boy Scouts in the state of North Carolina. And this is Harriet and Percy in the corner. Here are just some other examples of things that we have in our archive. There are thousands of documents that we have been archiving and that we have been collecting that are from their times at 4-H, at Tuskegee, in North Carolina, throughout Georgia, etc. And then there's the home. So for the last decade or so, we've been working bit by bit to restore the home and archive all of the information and documents that were in the home. There were a lot of generations of Stones that lived here, and we wanted to do something special to honor the history that came before us. Here is an image of, in the 1940s, Percy did a significant upgrade to the home. This porch used to be open, and you can see that he enclosed it so that he could have his office in the corner. This was the arrival of the house that was facing the water. He took that off and converted it into a galley kitchen so that HP could feed everybody in town. This is the garage apartment that was built next door. When they tore down the barn on the property, they used the wood that was from the barn to build the garage apartment. And that garage apartment went on to see many faces that lived in it that were significant. One of the people was Albert Bacon, who was mentioned before. The late and first assistant district attorney that was African American, Michael Pratt, was also a Savannah State student, and he stayed here while he was studying for his degree. And so this is a video, hopefully it will play. Of the home, just a couple of shots of where it is and where all of this history took root. And this, you can see, is Savannah State next door with the dorm that they just demolished. This property was all encompassing of that whole area. There are two properties there are two homes, single family homes, as well as the garage apartment that sit on the original property that Percy Stone purchased. This is the historic home, and, oh, you're partway through. This is the historic home, and then next door is where I was raised with my parents. Percy, again, wanted to do whatever he could to establish his family's legacy and create space and environment where we could keep thriving and where we could keep building. And I can truly say, watching my father be the steward of this land for all of these years and keeping upkeep on both of the causeways as well as the yard and all of the maintenance, it's been really phenomenal to be part of preserving and keeping this history. Here's an image of, again, everyone. This image was actually taken in the home. Alma used to do piano lessons in the home. And this is Percy again with my brother. This was in the last years right before he passed away. All right, special moment. Everybody in here has phones, right? We have a website that was created that summarizes all of this information. And you can take a picture of that. It will lead you to the website. There is a support link on the website that has a button that says click to support nomination. It is a change.org link, and it is free to write your name on the petition and sign to support nominating this to the National Register of Historic Places. We are in the process, like mentioned, of nominating this home. We think that the history of the people that have lived here deserves to be preserved. And it's a really important part of not just Savannah's history, but Georgia's history and our nation's history. And think that it's really important for that story to be told. I'll give you guys a couple more seconds to get a picture of the QR code.
I can send that as a follow-up too.
Okay, great. All right. Are there any questions? Yes.
I really appreciate you for doing this because this was a trip down memory lane. Miss Meredith Stone taught me at Savannah State. She taught Russian history. Miss Alvin Williams taught me English at Savannah State College. And finally, we used to go to Dublin, the 4-H camps every year when I was a child. So I'm sitting here with chills. It's really inspiring, and I really appreciate you doing that for your family. It's amazing, and thank you, young lady.
Thank you. That's awesome. Yes.
And to piggyback on what he said, Meredith Stone was my head start, she was my supervisor, the head start, very sweet person.
That's awesome.
quick question. You have Rocky Mount, Virginia,
Yes.
and I was born in Petersburg,
Okay.
and, but we used to go to Rocky Mount, North Carolina,
Yes.
and I'm going,
Where is that?
where is Virginia? What is it near?
So Rocky Mount, and I'm not the best at geography, I will admit that.
It's okay.
But Rocky Mount, from what I know, is between, I guess, somewhere between Richmond and, what is that area called? What is the city where UVA is? Okay, I think it's somewhat, okay, I think it's somewhat closer to Charlottesville.
Okay, because we didn't start going to North Carolina, but then you started talking about North Carolina. Which is so confused. My geography was really off too, but I'm like, I know we've traveled those areas with my parents, and I grew up on the campus of Virginia State, but when I started my master's program, I went to Hampton and worked at the museum anthropology, so they had one of the best museums
I've heard
on
about it.
campus, so.
I've heard, I really want to go by there.
Yes, yes, so thank you for what you're doing. I mean, it just opened up a lot of things for me too. You know, our connectedness, you know, you can't get that far away from it.
It's all
Our
connected.
connectedness.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for sharing your story today, your family story. Just two comments.
Yes.
Several years ago, as a part of my work at Savannah State teaching English, but I had also interest in history and that kind of thing. Came across the work of Vacant Work and tried to find more. I started compiling a list of everyone who has been a part of the historical, I guess, nature of Savannah State, those who went on to publish. So I've got a list of those texts. He's on there. And I was wondering how I could go further. Now, here's the irony, not knowing that the information was so close to me, like right next door.
It really was.
Oh, my gosh. And then your cousin, Aunt Marilyn Stone?
Yes, my Aunt Marilyn.
Your Aunt Marilyn was my biology teacher at Savannah State. So again, I'm taking myself. But anyway, I'm realizing now after your talk today, that when she would take us out into the woods, that's how she taught. She was hands-on. She took us out into the woods, I guess it was maybe in your family's backyard. We had to do hands-on things, collecting specimens. I remember something about water, like a creek or something in there. So, okay, so she used the home also as her classroom.
She did.
Wow, that was so interesting. She made biology interesting for someone like me, totally disconnected from the sciences. So, thank you for sharing, and it brought back memories of her. Little short lady.
Yes.
I mean, but
Very
she
short
was
and
powerful. She was short but powerful.
She's 4'8" for reference.
Yeah, and is she still okay? Is she still with us?
She is still with us. She lives in Canada.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Is she on social media or anything?
No, she does she likes reading books. Her husband they met at UGA, and he went on to become one of Canada's lead entomologists, which is the study of bugs. So he was a bug doctor, and Marilyn and Andy have been in Canada. He's been pursuing his life's work and research for the Canadian government, discovering all types of species of bugs, and she's been supporting him.
Well, she wouldn't remember me, but please pass on that she is still remembered here in Savannah by her former students.
I will do that.
I
This has been wonderful. I don't want to cut anybody off from talking with Meredith, but it is about 1 o'clock, so if anybody wants to stay and talk to her and share their experiences, that's great, but if you need to leave to get back to work, please feel free to do that. But I want to just really thank you so much for coming and sharing, and the pictures were beautiful, and the stories were wonderful, and I want to make sure we all thank you so much.